This is the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District Board Meeting. It's Wednesday, May 27th, 2026 at 3 p.m. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Blyle.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Fasella.
Present.
Friedman. Nudo.
Here.
Ula. Barnes. Quorum present.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda as distributed?
So moved. Second.
Motion carries. Next on the agenda is the audience participation. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak and address the board or on any topic? Hearing none, seeing none, we're going to move on to the next agenda item. Referring to pages 1 through 6, the minutes, is there a motion to approve the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District meeting minutes from April 29th, 2026, open session?
I'd make that motion.
Second?
Second.
Motion carries. We move on to communications. Are there any communications by the board to address to the director, staff, or the board itself? Hearing none. Next is the manager's director's report on pages 7 through 45. Carl?
Thank you. I will start out here with the statistics for April 2026. The April 2026 total ridership was 1,346,636. That is a 4.2% increase over last year. And what may be notable about that is that April of 2026 had the exact same number of school days and weekdays and Saturdays and Sundays as April of 2025. So it's about as pure of a year-over-year comparison that you can have. And so a 4.2% increase is quite good. And then excuse me, the fiscal year-to-date ridership reached 10.6 million, and that is a 4.1% increase over the same point in time for federal fiscal year 2025. Our April 2026 operating revenue was 6.3% below April of 2025, but the year-to-date operating revenue was only 0.4% below FY 2025. And just as a reminder, the predominant reason for the decrease in revenue from last year is the reduction in interest revenue that we've earned because of the lower interest rates compared to last year. The operating expenses for April 2026 were 10.7% above April 2025, and the year-to-date operating expenses were 3.9% above FY 2025. And the predominant reason for that 10.7% increase is, anybody want to take a guess? What's that? Fuel, bingo. So fuel is dramatically higher this April compared to April of last year. And the year-to-date operating revenue was $1,613,000 above budget, while operating expenses were $3,573,000 below budget. And so you can see by that when we budget, we do purposefully budget room in the fuel line item, for instance, to accommodate the wild fluctuations that we normally see in fuel costs. But these are not normal fluctuations; they're extraordinary fluctuations. But because the majority of the year we saw moderate fuel prices, and so we had plenty of room in that line item, and I think we'll be fine finishing out the fiscal year. And then with that, I want to point something out that was just published yesterday in probably something that all of you read regularly, so you may have already seen this in the Travel and Leisure magazine. There's an article with the headline of 9 U.S. cities with the best public transportation besides New York City. And number 2 on the list is Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. So we were just behind the Washington Metro in Washington, D.C. And I haven't had a chance yet to share this link with you, and I will do that this evening, but I wanted to let you know and let the public know that we're doing all right. And we're getting...
That deserves a round of applause.
Yeah.
Congratulations, team.
That's, it's nice to have some national recognition that we didn't even know was coming and didn't know that anybody was looking at it, had no advance notice about it. So it was a nice surprise.
Wonderful.
With that, sorry, did you have a question? No, okay. With that, I will answer any questions that you do have through page 38.
Before we move on, I just want to point out something for the public record too, and that is the last paragraph in Carl's notes about the ridership to Marketplace has dropped 60%, that Walmart has been the benefactor of that with a much higher ridership to that stop, and the merchants, employees, and customers are the clear losers of the decision that Marketplace made. Just wanted to make sure that got on public record. Any other questions of Carl?
You know, that is a drastic increase for Walmart. How much time did we save off of the trip to Walmart by shortening that route? Like, why would there be so many more?
Jay, do you want to come up here and help answer this question? Navigating the Circle Drive around Marketplace and then entering into the property and stopping at their main entrance there and then exiting and navigating around the Circle Drive again took a fair amount of time that Jay can probably tell you to the second, but it was a fair amount of time that allowed us to do this. Jay.
Yeah, I mean, I think Carl mentioned it, the amount of time that we are on their property. And yeah, by shortening it on the trips that we don't go up to Apollo, it's significantly faster. The trips, about every third trip we go up to Apollo, that takes a little bit longer. We've got to backtrack and then come across Market View up to Neal. But yeah, that's, we cut out a significant portion of time. And there was a really difficult left-hand turn off from Market View onto Market for the yellow route that cost us a lot of time as well.
Has overall ridership on that route increased as well?
I'd have to check the board packet for that.
On the yellow route?
That's really interesting, though, thinking about like high priority lines for people that are transit dependent. I imagine a grocery store like Walmart would be a big one in making those easier to get to. It'll be kind of fun to see if we have a drop off of traffic to the other Walmarts, where if people realize they can get to this one faster. I don't know. I just think this is really an interesting insight, and it might open some intelligence into what our riders really need, which I imagine groceries would be a big one. So,
yeah, we could dig into it. I mean, we have all the Walmarts covered. I'm not sure if getting up to the Champaign Walmart faster is a factor in not going to the Savoy or the Urbana Walmart. Depends on where you live, but yeah, we could analyze that.
Well, there's a direct correlation between the Walmart increase and the Marketplace decrease, so hope Jana Wiersma picks up on this in the News Gazette and rubs their nose in it.
yeah, at the same time, the idea that we've made 3,000 trip riders' lives easier at the expense of a much fewer number that were going to the mall, I mean, we might want to look at, you know, I've always talked about making routes more direct, making it easier for people who need transit to pick a spot close to the route, and that way they can, you know, not have super long trips. And it's hard in a town like this, but luckily density keeps increasing, but it's just kind of a fun example.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks.
Our next item of business is the fiscal year 2027 draft budget presentation. Who is leading that discussion?
That will be me if my voice holds out. I think it will. I'm feeling good today. So we've got, yes, another slide here, and Tech, I think you can go to the, let me make a couple of comments before we start digging into the meat of this. As you can imagine, a budget is a plan, and so we kind of prognosticate the future for the next year and try to determine what our expenses are going to be. And so I like to put some things out in front of the public that you and the public, things that we know that we don't know, and these kinds of things will impact the accuracy of the plan and the ability to be accurate. Some things that will be impacting this budget that you'll see is that pending the re-annexation of the parcels that you annexed a couple months ago in Southwest Champaign, the Liberty at the Lake area, the Carl at Curtis and Mattis, and a little piece of Cherry Hills. Pending that annexation, we are planning on launching the new 17 Cherry route that will provide new and regular service to the Carl at Curtis facility, and so that service is budgeted in this draft proposal. We brought to you a couple months ago an approval for an agreement for the enterprise resource planning software, which is, just call it ERP for short, and that's basically the backbone software for everything that we do back of house. It's what finance uses and customer service uses, and it's our journal our general ledger, and just everything that we do, that's that new software. And then on today's agenda, we have the companion piece to that, which is the EAM, or the Enterprise Asset Management Software, and it is a paired piece of software that maintenance primarily uses, but it's integrated with the ERP, and so we have about roughly $1 million worth of parts and inventory, while finance manages the financial side of that, and maintenance manages the actual physical inventory side of it. And so it does all the work orders that maintenance issues for work on all the vehicles and the facilities and things like that. And once hopefully you approve that today, then we'll have the complete package, and that implementation process will take about a year for each of those. And what are we, Amy, 3 months into the ERP? 3 months into the ERP implementation, so we have the remainder of that. And then in a couple of months, once we award a contract, it's same vendor, by the way, once we award that contract, it'll take a couple of months to sign the contract, then we'll start on that. So I'm bringing that up because that's about $2 million worth of expenses between the two of them. Some of that is occurring in this fiscal year, prior to the end of the fiscal year on June 30th, but most of it will take place in fiscal year 2027, which is the year that this proposed budget is for. And so that's a $2 million expense that's budgeted, that once that implementation is done, that's project specific, and so that won't be rebudgeted again in fiscal year 2028. We might not be done with the EAM portion of the implementation, so there might be a little piece that is budgeted for FY 2028, but it won't be like $2 million, and so that will go away for FY 2028. But that's a big chunk, and so I just want to mention that that's not exactly, but essentially a one-time expense. Yes, George.
Bill, will this conversion include the transposition of the data from the old system into the new system?
Yeah, that's part of the implementation process, is importing all of the existing data that we have in the current software package. And that's a big deal because it's not just importing it. You've got to import it, and then you got to translate it so that it's in, you know, all the right places, and the new software does things differently than the old software, but you have to be able to access all that data. So that's why it's so expensive, and it's a very complicated process. And you might note that this time next year, Amy might have gray hair. Because she is project lead for this on the staff side, and she's doing her regular job, but she's spending about 38 hours a week on this too. So pat her on the back if you see her. Did you have another question?
That's the only way to go. I mean, I watched Christie Clinic convert to a new patient record system, and they didn't convert the old data. And for a while, they had to be running both systems and signing out of this and signing out of that, and ridiculous.
Well, we hope to avoid the ridiculous.
Yes.
Okay. And by the way, George, thank you for interrupting me with a question. If any of you have any questions along the way, feel free to interrupt. Gives my voice a break, and better to answer your question when it's on the top of your mind rather than you forgetting it. So feel free to interrupt. The other thing I want to point out is that medical insurance is really skyrocketing right now. Actually, all insurance is skyrocketing. Medical insurance and our liability claim insurance, our general liability and our auto liability, the increases continue to be pretty dramatic with those. All right, with that, Tech has the first page up, so I will move ahead. This is a summary. It's a real high view level summary of the current budget, which is the column that's labeled FY 2026, and then the proposed draft budget, the column is labeled FY 2027 budget. So you can see the side-by-side comparison, and I'll point out the operating expenses in this current fiscal year are $57 million, and for this plan, this budget is $62 million, but reference the comments I just made about some of the increased expenses, the new service, the $2 million that are going into the ERP and EAM, and then fuel costs and liability insurance and health insurance and all that. That's why you're seeing a dramatic, it's primarily why you're seeing a dramatic increase there. You might also note that under the debt service, we see a significant decrease from 24 million to 4 million, and that is those of you that were on the board last year when you approved the budget, you might recall that I had a couple of capital projects that were essentially budgeted twice on purpose, and I identified them to you at the time, but we did that so that we would be able to budget the same projects in different grant programs, so that when we applied for those grant funds, we could say the board has approved the project, not on a contract, but just the concept of a project and it being funded by this grant project. And it was confusing, and it didn't help us in any way. So I think you'll not ever see me do that again, double budgeting projects. And so that's in large part why you see such a drastic reduction there. Okay, with that, Tech, you can go on to the next page. Oh, and I circled some of the things that I was just talking about. Next. Okay. This is our estimate of revenue and expenses. Tech, is there one with red circles on it? Yes, okay. So this first line item is our cash on hand. This is just the operating reserve that we have in the bank that allows us to have cash flow, and we can make payroll and do all the things that we have to do, buy fuel, do these things, while we sometimes are waiting for a reimbursement payment or a property tax payment, or these different forms of revenue that we have have that come in kind of a lumpy form. They don't come in regular amounts and a regular stream, so we have to have cash on hand. But I want to point out that you see at the top it's $6 million. Down on the bottom, we are increasing the planned cash on hand to $7 million. The reason we're doing that is because expenses are going up, as I just noted, with the medical insurance and the liability insurance and fuel costs and all the things. We are finding that for cash flow purposes, we really need to have a little more of a cash flow buffer there so that we don't get into a bind and we don't have to pull money out of the capital reserve to make our operating expenses. Next. Okay, this is also estimate of revenues and expenses, but it's for the capital, and I think I have some circles here. Yes, and that is just to show you that the planned capital projects that we have planned revenue. Some of that is revenue that we are still in the process of applying for, and so if we don't get the revenue, that will come off the books, but the project would come off the books on the expense side too. So we always will only do a project if we have the revenue for it, where we're not actually going into debt to do any of these capital projects. Okay, next is, okay, now we are going to look at the detail for the four budgets, the four departments that we budget for. We have the operations department, the maintenance department, the general administration department, and the Illinois terminal department. Those are the four departments that we budget for, or the new software calls them cost centers. So maybe in future years you'll hear me use that term if I can get it in through my thick skull that a department is a cost center. So this is the operations department, and here you can see that there's a significant increase in labor and fringe costs. That makes up the majority of the operations department increases, and from year over year with the budget, that's the operations department is looking at about an 8% increase, but that is in large part driven by the new route, the 17 Cherry route to Carl at Curtis and Mattis. Next. Here, where everything looks pretty reasonable. We're not seeing in services, materials, and supplies consumed or miscellaneous. We're not really seeing anything. I want to point out, I've been talking about fuel costs. This is where the fuel costs come into play, but even with the increased fuel prices, we're just leaving the budgeted amount at the same, because like I said, we budget enough so that we can accommodate the fluctuations, and so we've been able to accommodate the price increases, and we are told daily that the fuel prices are going to be coming down. They're going to be coming down. So we'll see. All right, next. All right, this is the maintenance department. By the way, these are in descending order of impact. So the operations department is our largest department and our largest budget. The maintenance department is our second largest in terms of number of people, but it's also the second largest in terms of cost. And so here are a couple of things to point out. We are, by the way, next month we'll start receiving our new buses that we have that we ordered. You approved the contract to approve a year and a half or so ago, 8 expansion buses, and they're on the line being produced right now, even as we speak. And the first bus that comes off the line should be delivered next month. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, beginning of July.
What's that?
Beginning of July.
Beginning of July, so just after next month. So those 8 buses are expansion buses. They're not replacing older buses. They're expansion buses. That's one of the reasons why we were able to do the 17 Cherry route, because we are expanding the fleet size. With that, comes difficulty in maintaining them. And so we want to maintain a healthy technician to vehicle ratio. And so with these 8 buses, we are adding a technician to the maintenance department. And so that's in the wage and fringe cost here as well. The other thing to point out is one of the other reasons why the capital budget comes down is that, I've got this reversed in my head. If you look at the next screen, Tech, if you look at the other material and supplies consumed line item, it was in this current fiscal year, it was 954, and next it comes down to 760. That's because we're moving the vehicle connectivity project out of operating to a capital project. And I can go into detail of that, why we're doing that if you want, but it's because GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, came out with a clarification on how to treat a project like this, and we had initially interpreted it as an operating expense, but the GASB clarification essentially said no, it needs to be capital expense. So we've pulled it out of operating and we're putting it into capital, so you'll see that at the end of this presentation when we talk about capital expenses. Does that make enough sense, or are there any questions about that? Okay. Excuse me. Moving on to the administration budget. This budget is where the ERP and the EAM expense is loaded into. So the admin budget sees a 21% increase. In days gone by, doing this software, it would probably have been considered a capital project. But under the new GASB rules, new being, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, software is an operating expense now because it's subscription. And so that's why this is all loaded into the operating budget, and you see this $2 million increase in the admin budget. It's more than that, but $2 million of the increase is for that software package, and that will be done when we're done with implementation. That you can see under professional and technical services toward the bottom of this screen. We also are adding a new staff position, which is a cybersecurity administrator. The Homeland Security and the TSA has kind of been busting our chops for a couple of years now about having a staff person dedicated to cybersecurity, and we've been interested in it, but it's, you know, trying to balance staff size and staff expenses with need. But with the advent of AI in the last year or two and the explosion of AI cybersecurity concerns, we are pulling the trigger, so to speak, on creating this new position and filling it actually as soon as possible. And Ryan Blackman, our Tech Services Director, is about to begin interviews on that. So we're actually going to fill it before the start of this fiscal year, just to get it into place as soon as possible. Okay, next page. Yes, that's the software that I mentioned. Next. Next. Okay. So Illinois Terminal, this is our fourth and final cost center or department. In this budget, we see a bit of a larger than normal increase in some of the wages and fringes, and I've explained to all of you individually and collectively that we are making efforts to make adjustments to the wages for the Illinois Terminal staff. They are the point of the spear for us and in large part the downtown community in dealing with the public. And while the vast majority of the public are great and we love them, there are also an increasing number of mental health, emotional health, and behavioral health, and substance abuse and homelessness issues that our staff are dealing with. And so as their job gets harder and harder, we are making some adjustments to their wages because we feel like, quite frankly, they are underpaid. And so we want to do right by them, and so you'll see an adjustment in here. Next page, tech. Yes, here you'll see under professional and technical services an increase from $10,000 to $25,000. That, while not a large increase, I just want to point it out because it's a percentage-wise, it's a large increase for one line item. We're doing some HVAC balancing work in the entirety of this building. In this budget, or in this line item, that's only half of the work that we're doing. The other half will be, or no, all of this is reimbursable because it's a complete system. So this is balancing the HVAC system. We were several years overdue on this. As a reminder, this is a 27-year-old building, and this is just one of the maintenance things that we have to do to keep it operating properly. Next page. This is, I was just about to reference incorrectly, but this is the non-dope eligible expenses. So these are the expenses that we incur, but they're not transportation related expenses. Or for another reason, they are deemed ineligible for reimbursement from our state operating grant. An example of that would be we hire a lobbyist to advocate for us in Washington, D.C. They do great work. When I give you updates, recently I gave you an update about the new House, the Transportation and Infrastructure package that the House just started talking about in Congress. I get those updates primarily from Cardinal Infrastructure. We're allowed to do that. It's totally legal, but that lobbying expense is not eligible for the state grant. The state will not support lobbying efforts, so we pay for that out of our local revenue. So that's just an example of something that would be on this page under professional services there. Okay, moving on to the next page. This is the capital section of the plan or the budget. The top section there is labeled debt service. That's taking advantage of the quirk in our state law that provides the state grant for operating expenses. One of the eligible operating expenses listed in the statutes is the debt service, meaning the principal and interest on a loan that is used to pay for a capital project, that the capital project is done for transportation purposes. So we take advantage of that by, we have a bank line of credit and we borrow money from the bank line of credit to complete said project, and then we get reimbursed for that cost from the state, and we pay off the loan. And so they're very short-term loans, oftentimes only a couple of months, sometimes longer if it's a bigger project and it takes longer to do it. But we pay off these loans very quickly, and we're able to use the state operating fund to pay off those capital projects. So that's what this section is. And just to point out the larger project on here, there's the bottom of that section, the debt service funded projects, there's a project labeled H2 station expansion. That's our hydrogen station. And then in parentheses, it says $10 million. That's the estimated cost to do the project, but you can see in the first column of values, 2.9 $2.9 million. That's the amount that we expect to, we hope to incur over this next fiscal year. And so that would be the amount of the loan that we would carry, and the remainder of that would be in FY 2028. And we've had ongoing conversations with IDOT about this, and IDOT is supportive of the project, and rather than doling this out in chunks like this over the next 3 or 4 years, for FY 28, they're talking about likely making an adjustment to our appropriation so that we can pay off that entire project in one fell swoop and not incur as much interest. That benefits MTD and it benefits the state because it lowers the interest expense. But that will be coming up in a future fiscal year, so we can revisit that a year from now. The next section, this section is 100% locally funded from our capital, our local derived revenue. The top line item is just all the ongoing expenses that we have to pour concrete pads for shelters, to buy and install shelters. And then if you'll recall, a couple of meetings ago, you approved the contract for urban solar for the new e-ink signs that we're installing. This is the line item that those expenses would be paid out of. And then I've got just a quick list I can run through, like miscellaneous facility improvements. You also recently improved replacing the grates, the drains in the shop floor. We have several phases of that project. That's in the facility improvements. It's replacing some kitchen equipment here on the 4th floor, which is not eligible for the state grant or federal or state capital funding because it's not transportation related. This is a banquet facility, and so it's something that MTD does, and we derive revenue from having this space, but we have to maintain the equipment, so that's a non-eligible expense, and there's a couple of items on this floor that we need to take care of. Let's see, the other big one I'll point out, the two other big ones, the architectural and engineering services, that A&E expense, I think that we actually will be bringing to you, hopefully maybe in a month, but maybe 2 months, an action item for you to award the contract to an A&E firm for the Illinois terminal expansion. And so the horses will be let out from the gates at that point, and we'll be galloping ahead on the Illinois terminal expansion project. And so this is the line item that we'll be paying for the A&E expenses there. The next one, the miscellaneous fleet equipment, this is where that vehicle connectivity that I mentioned earlier, that last year was budgeted as an operating, now we've pushed it to this year as a capital project because of the clarification on the GASB rules. And then the final section, the federal capital grant funded projects. We have the Illinois terminal expansion. We have 8 replacement buses, not the expansion buses that I referenced earlier. These are replacement buses that Ashley will hopefully be submitting a low-no application for these hybrid buses. One of the action items on today's agenda is for you to pass a resolution for that application, and that's this project here. And then the Urbana Downtown Development, also an action item later in this meeting. So those projects are there primarily so that we can get the money in place. We expect them to be predominantly federally funded, so that's why they're in this section and only this section. With that, I will answer any lingering questions that you have about the budget. Yes, George?
Bill, you mentioned 2 groups of 8 new buses. Are these hybrid buses or are they hydrogen buses?
Yep, good question. I should have clarified that. All of these orders right now are hybrid buses. We won't order additional hydrogen buses until we do the capital project that's listed on this capital page, the hydrogen station expansion, because we need to expand the station so that we have more fuel that we can fuel the buses with. So we don't want to have more buses, more hydrogen fuel cell buses on property than we can fuel, because they just sit idle and that's not good for the fuel cells. Good question.
Further questions?
So as far as the A&E firm for the terminal expansion, have we sent out like an RFQ for that yet, or where are we at on that?
Yes, we did a RFP. We did a bid on. No, I guess it was an RFQ on that in late 2022. And then the project got sidelined because of COVID, and then the original development team walked away, and then we got a new development team, private development team on board, and we spent a couple of years bringing them up to speed and negotiating and trying to work through things. And then, as I've told you recently, we have a good relationship with the current private development team, but they just have not been able to make their financial picture work. And so while we, again, there's no bitterness or anything, but we are essentially walking away from doing a consolidated project with them. But all of that has caused delays, and so this is the firm that we selected in it was either late 2022 or early 2023 to award to the Federal Transit Administration. Has been very understanding of the reasons for the delays, and they have said to us that the competitive bid that we did at that time was sufficient for us to award the contract to them. So right now we are waiting on updated cost proposals from this firm without the private residential component included, and we're 3-4 years later, so they need to update their costs. And so we should get that. I actually got an email right before the board meeting from the project manager saying that he hopes by the end of this week, maybe even tomorrow, that I'd get those. So I hope to be able to bring that to you at the June board meeting, but if I'm not able to, it's because we'll be negotiating those costs. So TBD, I guess.
Oh, that's good. And then on the hydrogen station, obviously the contractor is super specialized. Trillium or Loves is probably who's doing it, I would think. But do they hire any local labor as far as that 10 million is? Are they bringing in local people to do parts of it, or is that pretty much all out of Texas?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a foregone conclusion that it would be Loves. I certainly hope that Loves is a bidder. We've got a good relationship with them also, and that's who installed the first phase of the station. There are a handful of other firms that can do it. Lindy is out of Chicago. Air Products, I'm not sure where they're out of. I think they're a Canadian firm, but they have a U.S. presence also. Air Liquide. So, there are a handful of companies that could do that. I hope to get proposals from all of them. And so I can't answer your question because I don't know where the firm will be coming from. The firm that Loves brought in to do the first phase of the project, I don't believe they were from Texas, but they weren't from Illinois either. Do you remember, Josh, where they were from? I wasn't here for the... Oh, you weren't here. What an excuse. I was, and I don't remember, but I think that they were out of Colorado or something. I'm making that up.
We can't put a local preference in, but it'd be fun if we could keep track of, if any of the money is staying local, it'd be nice if we could advertise that, so...
Yeah, you're right. We can't put in a local preference, but...
Further comments or questions? So this is the draft presentation. Timing on a final?
So this is on display now for the public for 30 days, and so the next step will be at your June board meeting. I think that's June 24th. Yes, June 24th. There will be a budget public hearing at the beginning of that board meeting, and then an action item on that agenda for approval of the budget.
Thank you. Well, let's move on to the action items. Refer you to pages 46 through 48 for the first action item, which is to consider City of Urbana letter of support for the enterprise zone technical correction. Who's leading the discussion? Michelle.
I don't know that there will be a whole lot of discussion, but Michelle attended the meeting that the city held about this, but it's pretty straightforward. This has been a program that has been in place since 2016, where they abate the property taxes for new construction. So if a contractor builds a new home in Urbana, they get a 5-year property tax abatement. And in the original setup of the enterprise zone, there was an end date to the abatement. And so if somebody, and that's approaching, and if somebody built a new house today, they would, in theory, get a 5-year abatement, except that the enterprise zone ends in next year, and so they would only get the 1 year, and so they want to amend the enterprise zone, and they're asking the leviers of property tax to issue letters of support, so that that person that built that house in FY27 would get all 5 years of abatement. There just wouldn't be any new ones past the deadline of the expiration of the enterprise zone, but everybody who is in process would get the full benefit of the enterprise zone. I'm sorry, I think I told you that I'd let you do the explanation. I just couldn't stop myself. So if you want to add anything to that, you can, Michelle.
Since I'm here, I will say I'm Michelle Wright. I'm the finance director. And this 25 was when the city could first apply to change the expiration date. The expiration date of the enterprise zone is 2030. And so they will be applying, if they get enough support and the state agrees, applying to extend that 10 years to 2040. So the two asks for MTD is to change our resolution to allow the abatements to last as long as the length of the abatement not end with the end of the enterprise zone. And the second is to send a letter of support allowing the city to submit a technical correction to the state and extend the years expiration for 10 years to 2040.
Comments or questions?
Move the adoption of the recommended action on page 47 of our booklet.
I think George, Phil has a question.
Yeah, property taxes are kind of my thing. So do we know approximately, this has been in force now for, I guess, roughly 10 years. That's a little scary. That was 16. But what is the MTD increment that's currently tied up in this TIF as it stands?
That sounds like a detailed question that I would not answer, but I would be happy to research and try to get you the information on that.
By extending this an additional 10 years, of course, we're foregoing not only that increment, but then any increase in value from all property that's located in this enterprise zone for further 10 years beyond 2030, so 14 more years. And obviously, part of this is abatements, but there are many other uses for enterprise zone funds, and I think they're a very powerful and useful tool, but there's obviously a point where you, and I'm actually a potential beneficiary of the enterprise zone, so I can't even vote on this, but there's a point where you create a new enterprise zone to allow the release of the old increment and then start anew with a new increment rather than, locking away all of that value. Obviously, this creates a much bigger fund to play with, which could be great for economic development or infrastructure. It's just, that's a pretty long time for an enterprise zone to exist. So I'd be really curious to know what the numbers we're looking at are.
Sure, I'd be happy to look into that. And I know the benefit is hopefully that you increase that much more economic activity that would be even, greater than ending it and starting a new zone. But.
And I'll also say, I can't answer that question either, but I know you know this, and so I'm just going to state the obvious, that while there is an increment that is created and we abate that so we never get it, at the end of it, we will get it, and if we didn't abate it, that construction very likely wouldn't have, never would have been done, and so the increment wouldn't exist, and so we still wouldn't get it forever. And Urbana had experienced decades of fallow construction within the city limits, and so they started this program as an incentive for new construction. And while I can't quote the numbers, but I'm sure we can get them, the program's been successful, and there has been new construction in Urbana. And so it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, and at the end of it all, then the taxing districts would have additional EAV that they have access to.
So I guess the side of it to look at is it not only affects properties that are under construction, but literally everything in the zone, right? So you might have a 100-year-old house that continues for 15 years to be a 100-year-old house, but any inflation that happens over that period, if the value of that house has gone from $85,000 to $185,000, that $100,000 times whatever the taxing percentage, instead of going to the individual districts, it now goes into the TIF fund. So it does siphon away
I don't think that's right. This isn't a TIF, it's an enterprise zone.
Gotcha. That makes more sense. Okay.
Just new starts.
So this only applies to the new construction. So
Gotcha.
that house that you just mentioned
Wouldn't get
that
any.
value,
Yeah, that makes sense now. Okay.
That's the way I understand it.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. All right, then yeah, extending it makes sense if it's not related
Point
to
of
TIF.
order. We're supposed to be following Robert's Rules of Order. In Robert's Rules, you make a motion, you get a second, then you discuss, then you vote, in that order. We haven't been doing that since before I joined the board. I made a motion and I request a second.
I'll second your motion.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, let's take a roll.
Blile,
Yes.
Brown,
yes.
Fasella,
Abstain.
Friedman,
Yes?
Nudo.
Yes?
Motion carries.
We'll move on to the
Alan?
next action item.
Ellen,
Yes?
could I, my phone a friend sent me some data. I think Phil asked about the ridership relative to Walmart and Marketplace, and so I just want to close that loop so that I don't forget.
Sure.
Hopefully this isn't a violation of Robert's Rule of Order, but we already had it on the agenda, so I think I can go back to it, right? Okay. Okay. So you asked about the ridership, and thank you, Jay and Joshi, for sending this to me. So this is April ridership compared to April of last year. The yellow increased by 5% year over year, and the red increased by 17.1% year over year, which is a huge, dramatic jump. So that's just an April comparison.
So the red got shorter, but more people are riding it. Is that my understanding, basically?
Jay's nodding his head.
I mean, in effect, this isn't, it might be important to note that all of this ridership increase can't be attributed to just the north end.
Absolutely.
Because we did also improve the service. That same route, the red, serves the Meyer in Urbana, and so it also got some improved service because of the additional time that the route overall got. So some of this ridership increase is, it's route-wide, which is, it's a long route. It goes from the northwest part of town and the southeast part of town. So a lot is happening there.
Again, both ends are groceries, and that's
correct.
That's what people need, so that's kind of cool.
Okay. Next action item is to consider the Enterprise Asset Management, EAM software and implementation services contract. Who's leading the discussion here? Josh?
Good
Pages
afternoon.
49 to 57 is where we are.
Good afternoon, Josh Beerbaum. I'm the Maintenance and Facilities Director. And so I think Carl kind of planted the seed earlier about the Enterprise Asset Management software that we're looking at, EAM for short, which is kind of how I'll refer to it as I go through this. That EAM is basically what the maintenance department uses for everything asset related. So all of our physical assets, the way we maintain them, monitor them, optimize them throughout the life cycle, all the way from acquisitions through the disposal period. This software is what is in control of all of that. And so the aim with a good software is to try to minimize your operating costs, reduce your unplanned downtime, ensure that you're making wise decisions on how you maintain your fleet and how you reduce your costs throughout. So the current software we have now is Avail, or FleetNet as it's better known as. And when it was first adopted, I think it was an adequate system for what we had, but as the district has grown and technology has improved, we found that that system is really lacking in several areas. And so this new EAM would create several efficiencies throughout maintenance, definitely going to reduce our reliance on a lot of manual processes. Many of the things we do now, like our inspections, for example, are all handwritten, and we file those away, and we keep several boxes of paper documents that can be difficult to track and go back and do any sort of research or reporting on. This new software will also, it'll allow you to do electronic inspections as a different way of inspecting the vehicles. You use tablet-based systems or laptop-based systems, which will allow you to go through it quicker. You can make more changes kind of on the fly to inspections as needed. Storage of those would then be kept electronically, so they're not filed away in boxes, never to be seen again or difficult to find. They're going to be readily at your fingertips for reporting purposes. They do have a Power BI system that helps maintain the fleet better, gives us better decision-making capabilities, KPI reporting, all sorts of things like that. And so to find a new EAM system, we did go through a pretty extensive RFP process, and we had a really nice, I think, a nice pool of proposers. We had 9 in total that proposed, and we had a well-rounded evaluation team made up of several MTD staff members that looked through all 9 proposals. We got that down to only 3 that we moved into a demonstration phase, where we gave them a pretty exhaustive script of all the things that MTD needs a software to do, kind of all of our processes and some wish list items that we want to have in a new software. Throughout that demonstration phase, 3 proposers were invited to that. We then moved 2 of those 3 onto what we called the discovery phase, where we, I would say, for lack of better terms, we really grilled them with a lot of scenarios, and we made them really show us their best practices and all the abilities they have to change the software, to manipulate it, to be able to meet our kind of unique needs as a transit district. And so through that discovery process, we found that Crow was the elected proposer that we wanted to move forward with. And honestly, it was for several reasons. They really demonstrated a pretty strong commitment to meeting with us, meeting all of our needs. They had answers to every question that we had, and really provided, in our minds, the best pathway to implementation. When you're implementing a software like this, it is very challenging. I think, George, earlier, you and Carl were talking a little bit about EAMs and how you have to integrate those systems and bring all the information over into, a usable format, because we need all that historical information on our vehicles. And so Crow really showed the best path forward to do that. They had a great timeline. Their team seemed very knowledgeable on the products, and I think they demonstrated exceptional value in the product. So what we're getting for the money charged against the other proposers really, in our minds, made them stand out. So we were pretty unanimous in our decision to move forward with the Crow product, Microsoft Dynamics product, which As we talked about earlier, for our ERP, which is the financial software, this is the same. So this would just be an additional module from the Microsoft Dynamics product. So that also gives us really good integration between the two, because it's the same. So we don't have to worry about a maintenance software that's totally separate from finance and figuring out how to map those together. This is all going to be contained under that same umbrella. And the implementation team for the financial software and our maintenance software, there's a lot of crossover there with same people. So this should really be a good implementation, and it takes out a lot of those potential challenges that I think we would have had. So the recommended action here is approval for the managing director to enter into a contract with Crow in the amount of $1,057,945 to implement their new EAM software. So any questions about that?
Carl, anything else you want to bring up? Is there a motion to approve the enterprise
recommendation on page 49 of our booklet?
I'll second George's motion.
I do have a question for you. Is this amount of 1 million some odd something that would be yearly, or some fraction of it would be yearly, or is that a one-time shot?
Yeah, I can pass these out if you want to see them. I printed them. I'm going to pass them around. This is kind of a breakdown of their cost proposal that Katie's passing around. So it does show your annual costs, like your SaaS costs, which is subscription, your software as a subscription, but it also shows all their professional fees and all of the implementation. So this would include all of the professional fees associated with implementing, but it also is including the 5-year subscription cost for the software as well.
And then at the end of that 5-year period, there would be a new agreement to pay the subscription fee, either annually or for 5-year chunks, however we determine at that point.
But you can, like Carl said, the very top there, the SaaS, that's just kind of your ongoing subscription costs annually to operate the software. And then when you go down to the next block, the professional service fees, that's a lot of your like one-time build, implement, test, design. That's what a lot of those fees are there. But yeah, your ongoing annual costs are going to be pretty similar to what you see in the years 1 through 5.
Further questions or comments before we vote?
So the 1,500,000,71945, that's for the professional services and 5 years of software? Is that where that number is coming from? Because the budget and staffing says now the cost of the contract's 1057, which aligns with the professional services number.
I believe that that 1,057,945 you're seeing is mostly all of your beginning costs to implement the software. I don't believe that does not include all of your year 1 through 5. And Ashley, you may correct me if I'm wrong on that, but
I'll have to get clarification on that.
The board memo says the $1,571,945 is for the ERP software. That's the software that's already been approved that we're in the process of implementing.
Thanks, Michelle.
All right.
Anything further? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Lyle,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Fasella,
Yes.
Friedman. Yes. Nudo.
Yes.
Motion carries.
We'll now move on to action item C, pages 58 through 61, and that is to consider resolution 2026-9, low or no emission grant for the purchase of 8 40-foot diesel electric hybrid buses. And I believe Ashley's going to tell us all about it. Thank you.
Hi, Ashley McLaughlin, External Affairs Director. Yes, this resolution is for us to apply for a grant to help fund the buses we have already placed an order for. So if you'll notice in prior trustee action in February, the board approved utilizing federal funding in the form of 5307 funds and local MTD capital reserve to purchase the 8 40-foot hybrid electric diesel buses that will replace 8 2013 buses currently in the fleet. So those buses are on order. They're not set to go into production until Q3 of 2027. And so in the meantime, we'd like to apply for low and no emission grant funds to cover the federal portion of the vehicle cost. So we have time to apply and see if we get those funds and then swap out that funding source if we were to be awarded. The catch is that the low and no emission grant program has not opened yet. We don't know when it will open, and we don't know what the timeline will be for applying for the grant. So these 3 grant requests that I'll be talking about today are all anticipatory. None of those grant programs are open yet, but we're trying to get our documentation in order so that we can advance when the opportunity opens, in the event that there's not a board meeting before the opportunity closes, if that makes sense.
Carl, anything else?
Just to say, I guess, the part that was unspoken, the LONO funds, that LONO grant program, we have generally tried to use for the hydrogen fuel cell electric buses, which are zero emission, and the current stance that the administration and the Federal Transit Administration have taken is that they're not funding, they won't fund zero emission vehicles. So it's low-no grant program, and hydrogen buses are the no emission portion. And since they're not eligible, and we had been anticipating, because of the station expansion that we talked about earlier, George, that we would order buses with that, we were going to apply for low-no funding for the zero-emission buses. Since they won't be funded, we are pivoting and trying to access this grant program for the low-emission hybrid buses. And then the 5307 funds, I know this is confusing, a lot of different terms, but the 5307 funds are formula funds, not related to a discretionary grant program. And taking those, if we get the low-no grant, then we can take that 5307 money away from those 8 buses, and we retain that to do other projects like work on Illinois terminal expansion or the hydrogen expansion or the maintenance expansion or other buses down the road. So it gives us more flexibility with our funding, is the reason behind why we're taking this approach.
Is there a motion to approve Resolution 2026-9?
So moved.
Seconded.
Second. Further discussion or comments by the board?
I have one comment to make. I don't understand the rationale of having a low-no grant program and refusing to fund no-emission buses. Doesn't make sense. Nothing coming out of Washington makes sense, but that really strikes me as silly.
I would encourage you to write your congresswoman and senator, and I think they might agree with you, and maybe things will change at some point in the future. But that's the current environment in which we operate.
Other comments,
Compliment
questions?
you on working a way around it.
No other?
I'm staying away from that.
Will the clerk please call the roll?
Blile,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Fasella,
Aye.
Friedman,
Aye.
Nudo.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Move on to action item D, to consider Resolution 26-10 Bus and Bus Facilities Grant for construction of a maintenance annex in Urbana. Who is leading that discussion? Ashley.
Me again. So the Bus and Bus Facilities Grant is in partnership with the Low and No Emission Grant. They tend to be released at the same time. So this particular grant would be for bus and bus facilities specifically because it would be for a maintenance annex facility. And some of you may recall in 2023, we did apply for funds to construct this facility through the same program. And so essentially we've taken a pause as other priorities have come onto the docket, but we're ready to apply for funds for that facility again. We purchased property in 2023, that's 1209 through 1213 East University Avenue in Urbana for this project. And essentially it would be to create additional bus storage and other maintenance amenities to expand our current facility and our current capability of servicing and storing all of our vehicles as the fleet has grown somewhat. So when this grant program opens, then we're asking for the board to support local matching funds for a grant that would fund approximately $30 million for the construction of the proposed facility.
Any further discussion, comments? Carl? Nothing? Is there a motion to approve Resolution 2026-10?
So moved.
Second.
Second. Further discussion by board members or questions? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Blile,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Fasella,
Yes.
Friedman. Nudo.
Yes?
Motion carries.
I believe our last action item is Resolution 2026-11, Bus and Bus Facilities Grant for construction of a bus transfer center in Urbana. And Ashley stands ready.
Thank you. So this last one is for the construction of a transfer center at the site of the current Civic Center in Urbana. As you know, this project has been paused somewhat, and the memo does go into a bit of detail that this is the grant program hasn't opened, but we also don't know 100% if we'll be moving forward with this project. Currently, there is a landmark application under review to a historic landmark application for this building on the property, the Civic Center in Urbana. And so we would not move forward with a grant application until that question has been answered. And so that is currently making its way through the Historic Preservation Commission and the Urbana City Council. If they decide not to landmark that building, then we would like to move forward with a grant application this round if there's time to do so. If they have not answered that question yet, or if they do decide to landmark the building, we do not plan to move forward with a grant application. So there are several unknowns, but we're asking for this resolution to be put in place so that if the opportunity arises, we can move forward with a grant application.
Carl, any further discussion items you want to bring up?
Yeah, just to, I've been asked a couple of times, not from any board members, but from members of the public, like why wouldn't you just apply for these funds even if you don't know what happens with the historic landmark designation, just to get it in the pipeline kind of thing. And so I want to explain staff's perspective on that. For the district, we believe the worst thing that could happen is if we apply for those funds and then we can't implement the project because of things out of our control, and we get a grant award from the federal government to do this project that we can't implement, that's not the situation that a government entity, a grant recipient wants to be in, to say to their grant funders, hey, thanks for that money, we can't use it. That is really frustrating to them, and I think that they would say, well, we won't punish you for that. We understand that there are things that happen out of your control, and it's not like you're never eligible for money again. And I think that they would mean that and say it earnestly. The FTA, Federal Transit Administration, I don't think they would be lying, but at the same time, I do not think that we get reviewed. You see the results of the triennial review. It's basically a federal audit. And one of the things that we get reviewed on are we capable of implementing projects? And if we get funding for a project and we are not capable of implementing that, that will in some form or fashion come back to bite us. And so we are a little gun shy when it comes to that, and we're not willing to put ourselves out in front of that and take that risk when we are in fact not in control of the circumstances related to the historic landmark designation. So that's just a little background information for you and the public on why we may or may not submit this grant application depending on what happens.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 2026-11?
So moved.
Second? Who's seconding?
Second.
I think we all second it.
Mark.
And third and fourth.
Questions or comments from discussion? Yes.
You know, I guess just to inject some local history into the site, this sits just south of what was at one time a coal mine shaft. The only underground coal mine, I believe, in this part of Champaign County. Obviously, it wasn't a very successful venture. This was well over 100 years ago, but I wonder if you could work that into our grant application. I think something with coal would really be attractive to the current FTA and might help make people feel more comfortable about the effects this could have on our carbon footprint. So,
You can remove your tongue from your cheek now. Any other comments?
I noticed that there's a mention of a public hearing that could impact this moving forward. Can you tell us a little bit more about that hearing from the MTD perspective?
Sure. So that's part of the City of Urbana's Historic Preservation Commission's process for processing a landmark application. And so the application was submitted last month, I believe. And so within 30 days, they schedule a public hearing. So that public hearing will be Wednesday the 3rd, which is the same date as the next Historic Preservation Commission meeting. And so at that hearing, they'll take public input on the application itself, and then they may vote then on whether the commission itself votes to advance the application to the city council. They're not required to vote on that date, but it is also the date of a meeting, and so they may vote that same day to advance it to city council.
And timing is very important on this, is it not?
I mean, for us it is. We'd like to know as soon as possible, of course, what the outcome is.
Further comments? Questions? I just wanted to add, we had a great article in the paper. I thought you did a great job today about our position on what we want to do. And I know from a circle of friends and acquaintances and business people that I talk to about this issue is the irony of here we are going into a second phase of an intermodal transportation center improvement here in Champaign, and we are not using highest and best use of that land and property is not in its present state, nor will it ever. I read what the person said as a reason why it should become a historic landmark, but we're talking nostalgia, not highest and best use, and that building never served a purpose other than small things. So it just behooves Urbana to think about what's greater good for people working and living downtown and coming downtown. And I hope they take action on it.
And I'll just mention that you referenced the other individuals that were in that article. One of them is a past city council member and a current Historic Preservation Commission member, and then the other one was the individual who applied for the landmark designation. They both indicated that they were, I'm paraphrasing, so I don't want to give the impression that I'm quoting them, but they essentially said they were disappointed with MTD that we are focused on this location and we haven't looked at any other location. And so I'll say publicly, and I think all of you know, at least the long-term members of the board, we have spent 8 years on this, and we have exhaustively looked at other properties and their viability as a downtown transfer facility. And we have requirements. They are requirements for a parcel to be useful in this for this purpose. And so for an individual to say, well, there's an empty lot right there, why don't they just use that? Well, how far away from downtown is it? Because the further away from downtown, the less useful it is. How big is it? How many vehicles can we circulate around on it and fit a building, et cetera? There are all kinds of things, and we've looked at all of those. We've spent 8 years looking at them, and we had some fits and starts. We thought the downtown Urbana parking garage would be a viable location at one point, and spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out whether or not we could circulate the buses on that property, and we can't. It physically doesn't work. And we think that we're really good with projects like this, but we can't bend the laws of physics. And so it is true that the Civic Center property is the property that we landed in because the other ones weren't adequate for a variety of reasons. And so here we are.
Thank you. Any other comments, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, and Carl is much more gracious than I am, and that's why we love him. But I would say that we've looked into other buildings exhaustively, and, you know, in years past, Urbana was less receptive to receiving this facility, and we were frustrated in that, and those buildings have gone away. But I would say that our staff has, I mean, Carl, you have the patience of a saint, and I know at the end of the day, your passion is for our riders who are sitting outside in the rain, are using a porta potty at the Urbana parking garage. I mean, it really is, for being the #2 transit system in the nation, these are really pathetic accommodations, and it's not for lack of trying. And MTD has this absolutely incredible staff that's really, really good at bringing in state and federal money in huge ways, which does support local construction jobs, but also supports other taxing districts. You know, the Scott Bennett building, really, MTD staff tried to do that with grant money in years before the county did it. And I think we could have done something with hosting a lot of those same agencies at a much lower cost to local taxpayers if it had gotten through approval with the various levels of City of Urbana. And this could be the same thing. We're trying to provide facilities for Unit 116 schools, adult education, I believe, administration. And this is an opportunity to get them into new facilities that are transit-centric, which is really important for adult education and administration. If you want to come in and talk with somebody about how your kids are doing or work on your GED, there's a good chance you may be somebody who needs to use MTD to get there. And it's much greater if we've got a transit hub in Urbana. Anybody in Urbana can now get to Unit 116 schools. This is going to be really, really good for parents and people that are trying to work on their education as adults, ESL. I mean, there are a lot of really vulnerable people that this could make a big, big difference for. Just like we have Ready School, I'm sure the public doesn't all know this, we have an alternative school for kids who've been expelled or otherwise had issues with regular school right here at the terminal. And it's amazing because you can ride the bus from pretty much anywhere in the community to Ready School, get off downstairs, walk inside, go upstairs, and go to class. And that has a huge benefit for the community. You know, we're trying to get kids on the right track. We're trying to get kids ready for the workforce, help them avoid, you know, criminal consequences and find purpose. So, you know, what we're doing is a big deal, and I'm not saying that historic preservation doesn't matter. I mean, I spent a large chunk of my life fixing up historic buildings. I love historic buildings. But ultimately, you know, as much as people in my demographic really love history and really love preserving buildings and aesthetics, there are people who this is really, I'm not going to say life and death, but a really life-changing thing to have access to transit and have these facilities. And for us to be able to do this with largely state and federal funds is a really big deal. And it's not that if this falls through, we're just going to give up on Urbana. We're going to keep trying. But this could be another 5 or 10 years. You know, that's that's a long time to somebody who needs to do ESL and is right now shuttling between multiple locations and may have to quit his class. I mean, you think about the human consequences. This really should pass. So I hope that people think a little bit more about who all is affected and maybe go sit on those benches and try to use the porta potty in the parking garage this week.
Thank you, Phil. Anybody else?
Phil, you ought to say that to the Urbana City Council.
Yeah, just let me know the time, I'll go.
Probably coming up real quick.
Well, again, the public hearing is June 3rd on Wednesday, and then we don't have a date for when council would then vote on the issue.
What time on June 3rd?
I believe it's 7, but I'm not positive.
I think it's 7, yeah.
I think earlier in this meeting, it was encouraged by, I think it was Carl, for those who have opinions on issues to contact their elected officials. And just as people are welcome to contact us with their concerns about MTD, I would encourage people in Urbana to provide feedback if they can't attend that meeting. Perhaps there is some way for others to provide information to the Historic Preservation Commission and, speak up about this project, which is another line in a succession of wins for downtown Urbana, and we hope to be part of that.
Great point. George, anything else? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Blile,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Vasella,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Nudo.
Yes?
Motion carries.
Our next meeting will be an annexation public hearing on Monday, June 22nd at 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. at the Curtis Road Church of God, 2604 Curtis Road, Champaign. The next regular Board of Trustees meeting and public hearing on the fiscal year 2027 budget and appropriation ordinance will be on Wednesday, June 24th, 2026 at 3 p.m. at this Illinois Terminal, 45 East University in Champaign. Do I hear a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second? Okay, we got that. Those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.